Our next topic is habitat degradation and pollution, which differs from habitat destruction in that it's not a complete elimination of a habitat, just a reduction in quality. And how that affects the species, of course, depends on what they needed from that habitat and what was done. In these cases, the species can still use the habitat, but they're not doing it as effectively, and it reduces the individual fitness of that population of that species. And there are two ways in which humans can degrade a habitat. One is reduction in the availability of important resources, and the other one is an addition of a harmful product. So it's not just pollution pumping carbon into the air. It is also, it could be a reduction in something they really, really need. Some examples of that are removal of food resources or other things that they need to survive. Monarch butterfly caterpillars can only eat milkweed plants, and people frequently pull milkweed they find near their properties because if consumed in high doses, it's very toxic to animals. And so people pull it and they think that they're doing something good, but really they're removing the only possible food source for monarch butterfly caterpillars. And as a result, monarch butterfly populations have plummeted because of this behavior of removing the only thing that organism can eat when they're juveniles. When we remove water from a habitat because of overuse of that water in agriculture or in home use, that is going to be a problem for organisms like waterfowl that have to have, that was one of the essential resources we talked about in the habitat destruction lecture. They have to have water around in order to survive, in order to do all their normal behaviors, in order to avoid predators. And so that is another way you can do that. Some of those resources are less obvious. So if you're reading the overstory, eventually you'll get to Patricia Westerford's chapter, and she talks about how in previous years, we thought that we were helping forests by removing things like snags, which are old dead trees. But it turns out that those are essential resources for cavity nesting species like pine martens. That's what this little guy is here. They're too cute for life. Acorn woodpeckers need them. Snowy owls need them. We used to pull them all out, and that caused a plummet in these populations because they had to have them in order to survive, because you can't drill, you can't make a cavity in a living tree. It produces essentially defense chemicals and things like that, and it's a lot denser, harder to drill into. And so we were removing the only habitat that those species needed with those snags. And so we have to think about the entire ecosystem before we start messing with it, even if we think we're doing it for the benefit of the ecosystem. We could be doing something bad and not realize it. Another way you could degrade a habitat is to change its successional stage. So this is an ecological concept where basically, I don't know if you've ever watched a burned area recover, but basically if you take away all of the plant life there because of a fire, for example, the first species that come through are going to be your grasses, your simple plants. Then things that move in will be weeds, shrubs, more bushes. Eventually you'll get shorter trees, young trees, and finally you'll get what is called a climax community, and where the community is dominated by long-lived tree species. And this will happen without any human intervention. This is just how ecosystems shift in successional stage over time. Species have been specialized in a particular successional stage, and modifying the environment to change that successional stage makes the environment unusable for that organism. Spotted owls, for example, can need late successional stage forests because they're more likely to have older trees with these large cavities where they can lay their eggs and raise their babies in them. But other organisms, for example, the Kirtland's warbler, they need young jack pine forests. So it has to be that early stage 3 succession wave young trees, and it has to be jack pine. So if we say pulled all of the young jack pine forests, assuming that everything could use the older jack pine forests, that Kirtland's warbler would not be able to survive because they need that specific successional stage. So that's how you can degrade, by removing resources. The most probably common way we degrade habitat these days is pollution. This is the addition of something harmful to the organisms that live in this habitat. This is a classic image of a huge problem with human waste. We just produce so much garbage and it ends up in wild environments. But there are, classic pollution, trash, garbage, but there are new kinds of pollution like light and noise. Some that you might not have thought about, which is nutrient pollution, and I'll talk about what eutrophication and dead zones are. But you also have some really scary ones that are persistent pollutants, meaning those that are going to accumulate in animal tissues, and endocrine disruptors. And so in this lecture topic, I'm going to talk about these three classic new and nutrient pollutions, and then the next topic I'll talk about persistent pollutants and endocrine disruptors. The trash we make is everywhere. A very good example of what happens when you just dump trash into the ocean is what's something called the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And if you've never heard of this, basically, because of the natural currents in the ocean that have this sort of gyre-shaped current in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, trash that has been deposited by different countries into the water has accumulated into a giant patch that is 1.6 million square kilometers. That is 3 times the size of France. And it is likely that there are other garbage patches on the planet that we don't know about because of the way trash is accumulating in the oceans and because of the way the currents systems work. And people have this idea that this is what it looks like, that it's just like visible from the surface. You can totally tell where this patch is, but it doesn't look like that. It's more of a slurry of plastic bits under the water. So if you're just looking at the surface of the water, you can't see it, but underneath is just a slurry of plastics and other trash that, unfortunately, are consumed by marine wildlife. So Laysan albatross are beautiful birds. There is one at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. If you ever go in to see their albatross show, they're gorgeous. They are seabirds. They're at sea for many months and weeks at a time. And sometimes we find dead ones and the insides of them are just full of plastic. And this is where they would come for their nesting grounds, and a dead one came out and its stomach was just full of plastic. And this happens with whales, with seals, with anything that lives in the water that could get plastic in them. Some examples: sea turtles. Floating plastic bags look like jellyfish, which is what they eat. And so they eat the jellyfish, they eat the plastic bag thinking it's a jellyfish, and they ended up clogging their digestive systems, which can cause death. This is a problem for not just these organisms, but anything that lives in the water. They can get their gills clogged with bits of plastic. They can consume plastic and experience poisons from them, etc. So it's a big problem. Some other types of pollution, light pollution. Many species use day length as a way to control their seasonal behaviors. They use day length, like they use night and day, dawn and dusk, as a way to control their daily behaviors. And when it gets dark out, we turn on all the lights, and so it never gets dark. And that makes it hard for them to control, regulate behaviors that they need to do on cycles. Baby sea turtles are laid on beaches, and their mom lays their eggs and then moves on. She does not do any parental care. When they hatch, they look for light, because light should be reflecting off the ocean from the moon, and that's how they know which way to move after they hatch, because there is no mom there to tell them where to go or to follow. And when there are lights on the beaches, it confuses them of which way to go, and they go instead of towards the water, but away from the water. They're more likely to get eaten by predators. They're more likely to be stepped on and hit by cars and just fall victim to mechanical distress because they're not in the water. And this is a consistent problem. And if you read about some sea turtle protection laws, a lot of them involve just not putting lights on beaches that are used by sea turtles for nesting. Noise pollution is another one that people don't think about, but I don't know if you've ever been to a concert or a bar or a dance club that was too loud and you got really stressed out about it. Well, animals feel that way too. loud environments cause physiological stress, and so that can just affects their immune system. It affects their day-to-day ability to function, and is just not good for them. And loud environments disrupt acoustic communication. So if you have a community of organisms that need to hear each other, that's why birds sing all together at dawn. They are talking to each other, they're communicating. And if it's really loud because it's rush hour at dawn, they have to do something in order to be heard. And they could adjust the signal so that they call louder and longer so that it's easier to hear over the noise, but that's stressful. The same way your throat starts to hurt when you shout for a long time, their throat will hurt after a while as well. And they could adjust the timing, so they have to call at a different time of day. And we do see evidence of this. Birds in large cities, they do what is called their dawn chorus, where all the birds are singing to each other in the morning. They do that earlier relative to the dawn than birds in small communities that are not near loud human noises. The last time we're going to think for this topic is nutrient pollution. And this is when fertilizers or factory runoffs go into water and adds things to that water that throws off the general nutrient balance, specifically nitrogen and phosphorus. These are key ingredients in fertilizers, which are used in many, many, many farms in the United States. And what happens to that is it creates issues with the nutrients in the water, which throws off the balance of organisms in the water, which can change lakes from what are called oligotrophic lakes to what are called eutrophic lakes. And an oligotrophic lake will have clear blue water. It will have very few aquatic plants in it, which is why it's blue and not a greener color, a murkier color. These lakes tend to have very deep water with lots of fish in it because there's lots of dissolved oxygen for the fish to breathe through their gills. And this is a good a normal kind of lake. A eutrophic lake is going to be a very different type of lake. And you can tell this just by looking at certain lakes and around where you live. They'll have shallow, they'll have murky water, and it'll be more green, less blue. These are, can be caused by having high amounts of nitrogen and phosphorus in the water, which leads to more plants and more algae. And if that's how this lake is supposed to be, that's totally fine. Like there are eutrophic lakes that exist that's what they are. But if that high nitrogen and phosphorus exists because humans added it to it, what happens is you get an algal bloom, which leads to low dissolved oxygen in the water. Because that algae dies, things digest that dead algae, they use up all the dissolved oxygen, and the fish have none left. And this kills the fish and causes huge die-offs of fish in these lakes. So here we have one of the Great Lakes here. It experienced a algal bloom that could be seen from space and killed a huge proportion of the fish in that lake. And it takes a long time for these lakes to recover from this kind of nutrient pollution. A great example, or unfortunate example, is because of the amount of farmland we have in the United States and the fact that a lot of it leads into the Mississippi River Basin, all of that nutrient runoff, pollution runoff, goes to the Mississippi River, and all of that goes to the Gulf of Mexico. And as a result, the Gulf of Mexico has a dead zone in it. And these are areas where the dissolved oxygen is below 2 parts per million, and as a result, very, very, very little life exists there. You're not going to find the usual mollusks like clams, and you're not going to find the crustaceans like shrimp. You're not going to find any fish there. It really is just a giant, thousands of square miles size dead zone caused directly by nutrient pollution from farms that are thousands and thousands of miles away.